What's up, guys? Welcome to today's Level Up Live. We're going to be going over why we aren't quite making the gains we want in the gym, whether it be through muscle, just muscle building in general, or whether it be specific aspects, like whether it be I want to grow my chest, but it's not growing, but I'm seeing gains in my arms, or whether it be energy levels, we're just not getting as much as what we want in the gym, and we're just sort of feeling lackluster or just waking up tired and not feeling like you can go to the gym on that day. So we're going to touch base on a few things revolving around diet or nutrition, training habits, optimal styles of training, whether that be from your rest and recovery rates to the actual lifts you're doing to how much weight you're using. We're just going to touch base on each of these little different aspects and how all of them can compile into the outlook that we're looking at when it comes to what we're feeling in the gym. Starting off with nutrition as a nice, simple, easy one to jump into. If we're looking to gain muscle and put muscle on, first things first, we need to accept the fact that we need to eat more, especially protein, and we're probably going to need to put on a little bit of fat in order to get the maximal amount of muscle gains. In the bodybuilding world, not that we need to go down that rabbit hole there, but in the bodybuilding world, it is quite common to see people put on a lot of weight, including fat, in what we call a bulking phase. That's generally because the body just needs so much more nutrients in the system for it to start building that muscle and start putting on that weight while lifting the same amount of weight or more that we want to in the gym. It generally means that when we put more weight on, we're able to lift more. We're able to sustain longer workouts. We're able to hit the same muscle groups again repeatedly throughout a week or a 2 week duration, in which they would normally feel sore or just not quite the energy output that we need to be able to do that. The rep ranges that we're going through probably won't be optimal when it comes to training if we're not getting the right amount of nutrients into our body and into our system, because our energy levels just aren't going to be there. We're going to be falling behind when it comes to trying to get to PBs or trying to get the most output that we possibly can in an exercise. Now, I've got a few things written down here about how we can optimize our nutrition and get the most out of it. So I'll bring it up nice and close to the screen here. First thing we're looking around is, am I getting enough protein? Right up here. The reason why we need to get a lot of protein into our system, and it's such an important thing for training especially, is because our intake of protein directly correlates to the protein synthesis and energy production, along with when we go to sleep. If we're getting enough protein in our system, we're more likely to get the healthy adaptations of muscle growth and development. Whereas if we're not eating enough and we're not quite getting the protein in, the body ends up getting energy stores from our protein sources that we already have, which is a form of catabolism, where the body isn't necessarily like eating itself, or a morbid sort of look at it, but the energy that we're requiring to train as hard as what we are comes from the muscles themselves. And we're sort of eating away at our own gains that way if we're not getting the food and the nutrients in, so that it's the provider of energy, not our body itself. For the general day-to-day person, focusing on getting 4 evenly spaced meals, developing a little bit of consistency, at the very least, just a little bit of consistency. So eating around the same times and training around the same time will lead to the most benefit in the long run. So the little 1% is like jumping on that anabolic window is great. But if you're doing one thing out of everything I just mentioned, having evenly spaced meals and getting the right amount of protein into your body is 100% the thing that I'd be suggesting over anything else. Doesn't necessarily matter about the carb intake, doesn't necessarily matter about making sure that we're getting the anabolic window covered. It's just about getting evenly spaced meals and enough protein into your body that you're able to recover from the workouts we're doing. Now, jumping out of the diet and nutrition side of things and going more into the optimal training and what that looks like, there's a lot of different ways we can go about it. I've got another little whiteboard here with everything on it that we're going to talk about today. So in the optimal training, we're going to do a lot more than just lifting weight. When we look at the lifting of weights, we need rest. If we don't rest, we're definitely not going to see any gains whatsoever. Overtraining is a massive, massive factor when it comes to people not putting in the right amount of muscle. Whether it be this isn't for everyone, but there is quite a big benefit to maybe even training twice to 3 times a week on low volume, but really, really hard. And then using these other days for rest. Like everyone's going to grow muscle a little bit differently. So it's all about finding the appropriate way to train that suits you and your body best. So there is a bit of give and take and a bit of trying new things and seeing how that works for you for a month or two. But definitely finding the right amount of rest for your body is such an important part and often missed when it comes to training and trying to put on a lot of muscle. I like to just think of rest as not a 1-to-1 ratio, but maybe a 2-to-1 ratio. So starting out, jumping in and having 2 hard training sessions, a rest day, another 2 hard training sessions, a rest day. The other thing is I wouldn't think of it as a weekly thing. So you don't need to fit everything into the week properly. For example, my training at the moment is a 2-day on, 1-day rest repetition constantly. So obviously an 8-day cycle or 9-day cycle, whatever it would be, doesn't fit into a 7-day week. So I'd have an upper, a lower, a push, a pull, something like that. If I want push, pull legs, I do push, pull, rest, legs, push, rest, and then so on and so forth. So it doesn't need to fit an exact 7-day cycle by any means. Now we're looking at the joint and muscle fatigue. Again, this is related to rep range, but we're talking about how we can put less stress on the muscles and joints themselves while still getting a lot out of the training. So I'm doing something like a 1RM or a 2RM max lift that's putting a lot of strain on the joints and a lot of strain on the muscles. And we may not be getting the gains that we're looking for in that, even though it is cool every now and then to test yourself out and do a 1 rep max and lift as much as you can. I wouldn't say that's optimizing what you can do when it comes to putting muscle on. So the rep range between 5 and 25 reps is that optimal range where we're getting the right amount of muscle damage onto the actual area that we're working on. So whether it be a bench press for chest or a bicep curl for your biceps. When we're training for a 1RM max, I probably wouldn't recommend anything like that for someone who isn't on training for a competition or is not trying to test themselves to the absolute limit when it comes to a single lift. If you're looking to put on muscle, definitely not the way to go at all. We want to look at 5 to 25 reps. I know I've said that like 6 times now, but I'm just pushing that forward. We need the 5 to 25 rep range in order to put muscle on, not something either super heavy or going for like 30 plus reps. Going back onto the recovery side of things. Now, when people train, some may think that when they get DOMs on the day after the second day from their training session, that means, yeah, I've done an amazing job. I'm going to be putting on a lot of muscle. Now, I can't really, it's not backed fully by science and fully tested, but I can say that there is no direct correlation to DOMs or delayed onset muscle soreness and muscle growth. So just because you've got DOMs from a certain day of training doesn't mean that you're 100% putting on muscle from that session. But what it does mean is that there's a stimulus response, which is what we're looking for, to the muscle groups from training. That stimulus response means that we are seeing signs that the muscle has been worked to a fairly hard level and that we may be seeing muscle growth from that. Now, in that same sense, if we don't get DOMs, that doesn't necessarily mean that we aren't putting on muscle either. DOMs is not a direct correlation to us gaining muscle. So don't think about it as I need to feel sore after training. We just need to know that if we're hitting the right rep ranges under the right reps, with the right reps, with the right weight, with the right reps in reserve, whether we're sore or not the day after, we should be seeing a decent amount of muscle growth as long as our nutrition is up to the standard I just mentioned before. Going into technique, are we doing the right exercises? Optimal exercises for muscle growth just mean that we want to be hitting the target muscle group as much as possible. So, for example, a cambered bar bench press, which is a bar that doesn't go in a straight line across, it goes in, dips up, and then comes around, would be a much better exercise than just a normal straight bar bench press. Now, the reason that happens, I'll get a little bit of a drawing up, is if I'm sitting here on the bench press and we've got our cambered bar, like so, hands are on the bar, head's here, body's lying down. when this bar comes down, we're able to get a lot deeper with our elbow positioning. Now, if we look at this and compare it to what we would be seeing in a straight bar, there's someone sitting here with their head and their body's going down this way. This bar would only be able to get onto their body, right? It would stop there because obviously it can't go through someone's body. That's just not going to happen. But when the cambered bar comes down, we can get very low with our elbow positioning because of that camber. So our chest here is going to be put under a lot more stress. You get a lot bigger stretch in through the range of motion than what it would with just a normal bench press. Now, if we take that concept and we put it into other exercises and we're trying to get the biggest range of motion that we can and really stretch that muscle out, if we're looking at something like a bicep curl, if we're standing up and going to here and then coming up in this range, you can see that I still have a slight bend in my elbow. This is very common for people to do this just because it feels good, because we're putting so much stress on the muscle by keeping it underweight, which is a good thing in some stances, yes, but we want to get the full range of motion, so the full stretch. We're flexing our tricep just to make sure that the elbow is fully straight and we're getting the absolute max we can out of that muscle, and then we're pulling again from there. That would be an example of that cambered bar that I just told you in another exercise. Finding the biggest stretch possible and optimizing the range of motion that we can in an exercise would be one of the most beneficial ways to make sure that the exercises we're doing are getting us those benefits that we're looking for. Now, we can go into more detail about the exercises themselves. Optimizing a muscle group doesn't necessarily rely straight on the stretch of the muscle or the elongation of the muscle, but it does rely on how we can take that movement through as well. So if I'm doing something like a squat, but I can't get the full range of depth, that is fine. We can still gain a lot of muscle from that, as long as we're doing it under a controlled weight range, for sure, but a controlled movement. So if I'm coming down and I'm doing a quick bouncing rep, it's not under control and I'm not hitting the right target muscle groups because everything else is trying to stabilize and I'm trying to get all the way down and all the way back up in as quick as I can, we're not going to see the muscle develop the way we want, just because it's not hitting the target muscle group directly. So for example, we're keeping with the squat. If we take a 3-second eccentric and go nice and slow all the way down as far as we can, if we don't have that full range, completely fine. Get as far as we can down, slight pause, and then come back up. We don't want to pause at the top. We want to continue our motion. So we're going really slow down, hit our depth, slight pause, don't bounce out of it, come back up, and then come back straight back down. And up, and then straight back down. The reason we want to be doing that form of training is because we want to put as much stress on the muscle as we can in the elongation phase. Reason being, we're stronger when the muscle is lengthening than what we are when the muscle is contracting. If we can put in enough time under tension on the muscle group during that part of the exercise and then power out of that, we're going to see a lot more benefit than if we're just bouncing up and down. When we're looking at an exercise like, let's say, a tricep pushdown is another one that I see a lot of people doing when we're trying to get bigger triceps. The opposite of that would be a really slow eccentric on the way up this time, pausing at the top, making sure that the muscle group here is at its full stretch, and then contracting down out of that. Again, we want to do no pause at the top. We're not looking for a massive contraction, pause, hold. That isometric hold doesn't necessarily do anything for our muscle gains. We want to be hitting that point and then coming out of it really slow. This eccentric phase and eccentric lengthening of the muscle and getting a big pause at the top where the muscle is at its biggest stretch is a much more beneficial way to train than to have these pauses at the top holding, for example, in the tricep where we've just paused at the top, or with our squats, if we just pause at the top and take a breath, we're putting our body under a larger systemic load for no real gain overall. Now, the final thing I want to touch on is exactly what I just said, systemic loading. So when we're targeting muscle groups, doing big compound exercises, yes, is great for training. Yes, is great for muscle development. Yes, it's all the benefits, 100%. But if we're going into training and we're doing a squat, a deadlift, a bench press, some lunges, and we're doing lots of big exercises, the systemic fatigue on the body just means that we won't be able to get the most out of the exercises the more that we do. So if I start with my hardest exercise here and I'm doing a squat, and then I go into a bench press, and then I go into a lunge, and then I try and do a deadlift, by the time I'm at that deadlift, I've lost a lot of my energy and I'm lifting at a lower standard than what I would be at the top. So when I'm training, I want to think about this, keep things not as systemically fatiguing, so not massive big compound exercises back to back to back to back. And I don't want to also leave the exercises that I'm most focusing on. So if I want to grow my chest the most, I'm not leaving the bench press to the last exercise where I'm the most fatigued at the end of the workout. I want to hit the target muscle groups that I want to grow at the start and then hit the accessory stuff as I go. Generally speaking, most of our PTs here, when we are doing our programming, you won't see us put a massive deadlift, 3RM, 5RM, whatever it might be, as heavy as we can go at the end of the workout. Quite often you see like a calf raise or bicep curls, tricep extensions, those sorts of things at the end of the workout, just because they're more isolating on a muscle group and not as systemically fatiguing. And we're not requiring the whole body to be at an absolute optimal level straight away. So for example, the deadlift using our glutes, our quads, our core, our back, everything's getting lit up from a deadlift. We won't be able to do that to the same level that we could do at tricep extension, especially if we've done a workout that isn't involving the triceps as much, because we're not requiring the whole body to work as hard as it can to get as much out of it as it can. So keeping that in mind, just touching over everything we've gone over, nutrition wise, we want to make sure we're eating enough. Generally speaking, I'd say eat more than required. So we want to be in a calorie increase rather than a calorie deficit, calorie surplus, where we're eating more than what the body necessarily needs for day-to-day activities because we're training as hard as we can. 2 would be making sure we're getting enough protein into our body. Protein is super, super, super important. And I'd say a lot of people aren't quite getting enough into their system. So whether that be through protein shakes or changing your breakfast from toast or cereal to having a protein source, whether it be eggs, whether it be some protein yogurt with a protein smoothie, whether it be having some, I don't know, chia seed pudding, something that's got a natural source of protein in it. That sort of breakfast would be much, much better off than having just a general carb heavy breakfast like toast before going into a day of training. On top of that, we're looking at the optimal ways to train. So we want to hit the optimal weights, have consistent rest, make sure we're resting properly. So a rest day doesn't necessarily mean going for a sprint, and it doesn't mean doing a cardio session. A rest day means we're resting. We do absolutely nothing, or we can do very limited, whether it be a yoga session, or we jump in the ice bath, or we jump in the sauna. Do something to relax and do very little to none when it comes to our rest days, and make sure that they're nice and consistent throughout our workouts. Training to failure, reps in reserve. We want to hit that 1 to 2 RIR and try to stay away from that 5 reps in reserve where we're doing an exercise and we're sitting down at the end of it thinking like, yeah, I could probably rep out another 10 of those. That's not the style of training that's going to gain us any muscle there. Joint muscle fatigue, making sure that our rep ranges aren't down to the 1 to 3s where we're hitting an absolute maximum effort very commonly, or not very commonly, sorry, consistently. So I'm not doing a 1RM 1 week and then doing another 1RM the next week. If you really wanted to do a 1RM, build your way up to that over the 4-week period, a month or 2-month period. Do that and then not come back to it again for another 2 to 3 months. Leave that for a specific time where we're either wanting to test ourselves, we're doing a competition, or anything of the sorts where it's a once every now and then thing, not consistently doing that in our training. The 5 to 25 rep range, the consistency of hitting somewhere between that 5 rep, working heavy, hard, and the 20 to 15 rep where we're putting a lot more hypertrophy training into it, doing a lot more reps to get a bit of a pump going. That sort of rep range is going to be the optimal for when we're lifting weights to gain muscle specifically. Recovery, so touching on the DOMs again, the correlation to growth, it's not directly correlated to growth, but then again, it also means that if we're not feeling DOMs from a workout, it doesn't mean we're not gaining any muscle. If we're training optimally and we're eating optimally, chances are we're gaining some muscle. Okay. Technique. Am I doing the right exercises? Am I doing the exercises to get a big stretch and full range of motion throughout the entirety of the exercise? And am I training to the level that we just mentioned before within that exercise, making sure I can get the full range all the way through and we're not doing little half pump reps or anything like that. I'm pretty sure that's all I wanted to touch on with this. So I'm sure there's a lot more we could go into detail with, which you can do at another session, but these sorts of main blanket tips will be a really, really good starting point for anyone that wants to gain some muscle. And that could mean dialing in one or two of these things and not doing all of it in one go. It could mean taking one thing that we feel like we could improve on, like nutrition, for example, or optimal training, and hitting one of these targets and really focusing in on that so that we get the most out of that part of the training and then develop the other things as we go. Or if we're feeling like we're pretty confident with all that, touch base with yourself, come into it and be like, am I really eating enough? Am I training properly to the optimal level? Am I hitting the right amount of reps? Or am I sort of feeling myself get to the point where I'm maybe plateauing a bit and I'm doing the 12 reps and maybe I could do a few more than what I used to be able to do. Try and have a little bit of a chat with yourself, that little self conversation to see where you're at in your training and your diet and nutrition levels, and go from there. Hope that helps and everyone has a lovely day, and I'll see you guys on the next one.